Yeah, it's your boy Ray on the mic. Let's go. Mic check, mic check. Welcome to On the Mic with Ray White, where we share life lessons, encourage self-reflection, and equip you to take action. My name is Ray White, and I am juiced. You're taking time to listen to this episode today. And we're continuing on our series called Claiming DE&I, where we are looking to infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, principles, and perspectives into the way that we lead our teams, ourselves, and our organizations. Because there's no fun to have the DE&I efforts and initiatives be its own separate entity. It shouldn't. It should be a part of our integrated culture and the work efforts that we are doing so we can create an inclusive community where every identity belongs and thrives. And we are on the A of CLAIM DE&I, the acronym that we've created. And if you want to listen to the previous episodes, I'll have the links in the show notes where you can listen to the previous 2 episodes and why we're doing this for 2023. But what today I want to talk about is how do we assess our DE&I efforts and ensure that they are walking the walk and modeling the way in which that we want to create this belonging culture for our communities. So, and just a quick recap, I really wanted to do this series because I wanted to not let our DE&I efforts just stay on a statement, philosophy, policies, words on the wall, colorful language, be very performative in the way that we are approaching DE&I. I truly want our work efforts to have some teeth to it, right? To have some meaning behind what we are doing, because we are seeing more and more staff members feel like they don't belong, feel psychologically unsafe, feel like they can't show up at their true authentic selves if they want to. And we're perpetuating more and more harm through our actions if we're not intentionally thinking through about the historically excluded identities in our environment, or if we are thinking that our efforts towards closing racial equity or closing inequities or shoring up inequities in our community is actually doing something, when really it's just causing more harm than good. So today, as we are talking about how do we assess our efforts, the assessment part is one of the intriguing ways that we can ensure that the work that we're doing from a DE&I perspective is truly making sense. Like, it truly matters, right? It's not just something we just like to do. It has some meaning to it. And the assessment part of it can sound very grandiose. It can sound like, oh man, we got to have like a McKinsey company or pick a firm, a Culture Amp, whoever that's coming in and doing some like immaculate organizational assessment that looks top to bottom, whether or not we are practicing equity or performing any inequity, turning over rocks and seeing if there's any area where we are not being as inclusive, we are not practicing DE&I in any way, shape, or form, from leadership to policies to practices to the way that we even just converse with one another, which is needed. Like, let's be real. Like, we need to have organizational assessments as a part of our daily practices when it comes to seeing if we are meeting the goals that we are wanting to meet as an organization. We have to analyze, we have to assess, we have to do that level of formalized process that's happening either on a annual basis, biannual basis, quarterly basis, what have you, to just ensure that we're not just saying we're inclusive, but we're actually practicing it. And so what I actually plan on doing is designing what an organizational assessment process could look like for nonprofits, especially in organizations and teams, especially those who are striving to be more inclusive in their workspaces. So that way, you have a plan to approach that. And when we talk about measure towards the next couple letters in our acronym of CLAIM, we could talk a little bit more detail about what are some of the things that we can measure in that way. But today, to get you started right now, I really want to scale back a little bit and demystify the fact that you don't have to have this big, glorious survey with a report out and all the things. What you could do is just take a look at your statement and flip it into a question. So if you say that our organization works to include every identity within our community, then you just ask the question, do we include every identity in our community with decision making? Right? Like, what if we were to just critically assess how our statements, our values, our mission and vision, and not just say that these things is who we are as a value, but who we are as an organization, as our kind of our culture, as our brand, we leverage that as a part of our barriers or guardrails or even North Star, just to say we want to hold ourselves to these ideals. And by doing so, we need to ask ourselves if we are living up to this. And if we're not, what do we need to do to live up to that? That takes us to the first part of this, is just knowing what your mission and vision and values are. Like having a clear sense of what those look like, being able to adopt and even maybe transform some of those efforts of an institution and juxtapose that with anti-racist perspectives, juxtapose that to restorative practices, put that up against belonging cultures and values in which there are people, if your organization really truly want to embody, and see whether or not your mission holds up. Sadly, especially in some of the nonprofits that I've worked with or engaged with, or just we know, all these nonprofits are focused on the injustice in our community, which is phenomenal. Like, we need to focus on those injustices and the external lens, but then we don't really necessarily take a look at that same level of equity or same level of servitude within our institutions and look to see if we are practicing or modeling that same level of intentionality to those that we're serving externally, to the people that are part of our teams, which is why there's such a big skew, or where that savior complex comes into play, thinking that this organization has the answer to solve this community problem, but don't really take the same tools to solve the problems internally. You know what I'm saying? So if we look at our mission and vision and values, if we look at what does it take to be an anti-racist, if we put those two things together and then say, are we living those up? It may take us a minute to tweak those things so that way we know that it's a part of our work efforts on a regular basis. Is baked into who we are. The second thing we got to know in our assessment process, the things that you could definitely do, is just to know what stage you are in this anti-racist journey. In my book, I have a framework in there that I'll talk about in another episode that talks about where people are when they are engaged in any type of anti-racist work. Everybody is in the aware state, but some people move to become an ally and advocate based upon their ability to lean in and understand their own self-awareness and in cultural intelligence and competency, humility, and decide to build relationships and engage with those who are historically excluded and find ways to incorporate their voices and share power, or step back from certain spaces to allow new voices to step into the room and help with decision making, right? But then there's also folks who, when they become aware of an injustice or inequity in their environment, they move to become to the disengaged side of the world, where you are avoiding and then you're absent from those problems. And that just perpetuates more and more harm or keeps things a status quo. And from an organizational sense, Cherie Daniels in her book, The Anti-Racist Organization, really outlines the 4 different ways that an organization can be anti-racist in their work, right? Where, the first level is just kind of by policy, right? Like you have to do it based upon law. The next stage is there's a little bit more engagement and inquiry for educational purposes to learn what it means to be anti-racist for yourself and others. The next stage is providing more related work towards creating inclusive spaces and belonging and incorporating new voices into the work that is happening in your organization. So the third is really on the anti-racist advocacy side, where you're actively speaking up and speaking out on injustice from a community standpoint, from an organizational standpoint. And it's okay to be on any part of that stage. Like, it's fine to be on the stage, a part of the spectrum, as long as you know what part of the spectrum you're on, and then you're moving, actively taking the steps to move to a position where you are practicing DE&I on a regular basis. And it takes that intentional work on your end to know where you are and know where you want to go, where you need to go, and identifying the steps necessary to get to that point there. So you could do those things right now, like align your mission and vision and values with an anti-racist perspective, and know what stage you are in from an internal when it comes to becoming an anti-racist, and finding and assessing if your actions are aligning to those ideals. Now, another assessment point, which kind of gets to our ability to look outward, is having conversations with those around us just to understand where they are and what they feel and experience when it comes to our anti-racist work efforts. Similarly to seeing our statements turning our statements into questions to create an evaluation form for our ability to recognize that. We could do a self-assessment, but then you could turn around and do a performance evaluation or organizational evaluation as well, saying, hey, staff member, do you feel like we're being inclusive with our decision-making processes? If so, where have you seen it in action? Or if not, how can we be better? If you are practicing racial equity, you're taking the steps to identify where are the inequitable gaps within your organization and then create a opportunity such as utilizing a framework called target universalism, where you are looking to see how can you help every demographic reach the same goal, but know that every demographic may have certain needs or specific needs to reach that goal, right? Which again, we'll talk more about that in a measured state. But these types of things are having the conversation with you and your organization and doing that self-assessment and organizational assessment by just asking questions can help you know where you are on the journey. And it doesn't have to become guesswork because you've already wrote the statements. You've already wrote the mission and vision. You're just engaging your community and asking them, do we see ourselves this way? And if not, how do we see ourselves this way? So don't create that disconnect. Don't let that disconnect hinder you, or the inability to build relationships hinder you from truly seeing where we can grow together, because it's okay to grow. Growth is a part of the process, especially in this space. Nobody is it perfect. I don't have it perfect. I'm still learning myself as well. All these books and more that I'm trying to engage with to continue to enhance my skill set of being that organizational leader that it practices anti-racism in their work efforts. But we can't be afraid to ask the question. We can't be afraid to evaluate ourselves and others on how well we are doing that, because that's the way that we're going to grow. That's the way that our blind spots will be cleared up through the light. And that's the way that we will be able to create these inclusive communities where every identity belongs and thrives. So, as a recap, you got to assess your own capabilities of practicing DE&I and its concepts and the frameworks and the perspectives within your organization. And one of the best ways to do that is to flip your statements into a question. Ask people around you whether or not you, from a self-assessment and a performance assessment evaluation, if you are holding yourselves true to those ideals, doing your own homework and research to know where you are on the anti-racist spectrum and being able to practice that internally and institutionally. And then more importantly, being sure that the work that you're doing aligns with your mission and vision values, and reflect on those on a regular basis, day in and day out. Next episode, we're going to talk more about what does it look like to infuse this into the work, which honestly, it is taking our assessment to the next level, right? And actually putting practices into place to create this belonging workplace culture. And then after that, we'll talk about how we measure this on a regular basis in a more formalized way. If you are an organizational leader who is looking to practice or claim DE&I within your leadership or the leadership of your team and organization, I would love to talk with you and find ways that we can support one another on this effort. In the show notes, there is a link to my inquiry form that we can set up a call and have a conversation about what does it mean for you to infuse DE&I, to claim DE&I within your organization and within your practices. And I would love to find an opportunity to serve you in that way. Let me know what you think about this episode. Let me know what efforts you're doing to assess your own DE&I efforts within your organization. I would love to connect and collaborate with you on those things, and share this with a friend or somebody who is also on their DE&I journey or organizational change. Ask them what they are doing to assess their DE&I practices within their organization as well. And let's create a dialogue. Let's create some community around those different things. Continue to share your story with others, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.